My husband, Oliver, once smiled and casually said, "I only married you because you're the boss's daughter." I was lying in bed, ill, staring at the scarves and gloves I had lovingly knitted for him, now carelessly discarded. His words struck me deeply, making it clear that I needed to confront the situation. We had been married for 5 years, without children, but I had always considered us happy, though his job kept him busy and left me feeling lonely at times. He made efforts to spend time with me on his days off, which helped. Oliver and I met through my father, who used to be his boss. After we got married, Oliver suggested I stay home, and it seemed like a sensible choice then. It gave me the freedom to pursue hobbies like sewing and knitting. Every winter, I would make him scarves and gloves. At first, they were not the best, but I got better with time. Oliver once said they were as good as store-bought items, which made me proud and motivated me to keep going. One day, I mentioned to him, "When we have a child, I'd love for us to sew together." He smiled and said, "Maybe I'll learn when the time comes." I always supported him, taking care of our home and making sure we spent time together when he was free. From the outside, our life seemed perfect. His good salary allowed us a comfortable lifestyle, and I was content imagining a peaceful future with him and our future child. 2 years ago, things changed. One evening, while waiting for Oliver to come home, I suddenly collapsed and felt dizzy. He rushed me to the hospital. When I woke up, I overheard him speaking with the doctor, learning that my condition was chronic. While it wasn't immediately life-threatening, it was something I would have to manage for the rest of my life. Doctors recommended I remain in the hospital until I recovered. Seeing my anxiety, Oliver reassured me, "Don't worry, I'll visit whenever I can. We'll face this together." His words and his comforting hand in mine helped ease my fear. With him by my side, I felt we could handle anything. True to his promise, he visited almost daily at first. He brought my sewing supplies to the hospital and even began learning to sew with me. It was a small joy that helped pass the time. However, after a year, his visits became infrequent. Instead of coming daily, he showed up once every few weeks. I thought his work was demanding, so I continued making scarves and gloves for him, excited to give him a new scarf when he came next. I was also getting ready to be discharged by the end of the year and planned to surprise him with the gloves I had made. I poured my heart into crafting them, hoping they would show how much I cared. When Oliver finally visited again, he glanced at the gloves and coldly said, "You're still making these? They're annoying." He tossed the scarf I had made him aside and handed me divorce papers. The scarf, which I had worked so hard on, appeared untouched, as though it had never been used. "You've been in the hospital for 2 years now," he said bluntly. "I know you're getting discharged soon, but I can't keep doing this. Let's end it." He had already signed the papers. In that moment, I realized it was over. I had suspected this might happen ever since his visits became rare. I had told myself he was just busy with work, but I knew deep down that wasn't the case. The Oliver I knew wouldn't neglect me without a reason. If work had truly been overwhelming, he would have communicated that to me. His silence told me everything. Despite the shock, I calmly asked him why he wanted a divorce. I wasn't trying to hold on to him. In fact, I had come to terms with the fact that I might be a burden. But since Oliver had once promised we'd face everything together, I wanted to understand why he had changed his mind. His response was harsh. "Isn't it obvious? Since I married you, my life's been nothing but a headache. I didn't marry you out of love. I did it because you were the boss's daughter. I'm tired of your scarves and gloves. I never wanted this life." He laughed cruelly as he said it, dismissing the life I thought we had shared. He mocked my love for the simple things, my belief in happiness, love, and companionship. "Who even wears handmade scarves anymore?" he scoffed. "Getting them from you was just a nuisance." I noticed that he was wearing an expensive scarf, one I hadn't given him. Clearly, he had found something of better quality and had no use for my handmade gifts. It dawned on me that maybe he had never appreciated them in the first place. When my father retired and I became ill, Oliver no longer felt obligated to care. At work, my illness had even given him an excuse to gain sympathy. I could imagine my father praising him as a dutiful husband who managed both work and a sick wife. Oliver admitted that my condition had made him more popular at work. "Whenever I mentioned you, people felt sorry for me," he said. "It helped me get ahead. When I needed time off, all I had to do was say, 'My wife is sick,' and everyone understood." He had used my illness to his advantage, and with my promotion coming up, "I owe it all to your illness," he added, completely devoid of remorse. I stared at him, seeing not the man I had once loved, but a stranger. His true colors were on full display. "Well," I said quietly, "if I helped you in some way, Then I guess that's something. We probably won't see each other again. Take care. I handed the signed divorce papers back to him. Without hesitation, he took them and left. That was the end of our marriage. I cried, but only briefly. After my discharge, I moved back in with my parents. My father was outraged when he learned what had happened, but I had already come to terms with it. I reassured him that I was okay and wanted to stay with them for the time being. They supported my decision and welcomed me back into their home. Before moving in, I visited the house Oliver and I had shared. To my surprise, the lock had been changed. A stranger answered the door and explained that he had bought the house months ago. My parents were furious, but I chose not to make a scene. I called Oliver, and he casually told me, "Yeah, I sold the house while you were still in the hospital. The money is mine, it was my house originally." His indifference stunned me. He had sold the home without even telling me, long before our divorce was finalized. Though we had agreed to discuss asset division after my discharge, he had acted on his own, showing just how little regard he had left for me. When I calmly confronted my husband on the phone, I told him, "You didn't grasp anything," and he sounded confused. "What do you mean?" he asked. I replied, "I'll explain next week," and hung up. Turning to my concerned parents, I smiled and requested a favor from my father. I explained my plan and asked him to get everything ready. "I've already prepared the necessary paperwork. There's not much time before our meeting next week, but we'll make it work," my father said with a slightly worried smile. He likely felt guilty for introducing me to my husband, and his frustration fueled his determination to assist me. I thanked him, looking forward to the upcoming meeting. Just picturing my husband's reaction made me smile, something I hadn't done in a while. With my father's support, I prepared for the meeting, which we decided to hold at my parents' house. We sat facing each other, my parents and I on one side, my husband on the other. He seemed indifferent, likely thinking he no longer needed to show any respect to my parents. His arrogance was obvious, even with a faint smirk playing on his lips. "I'm the one who's been wronged here, but I won't ask for much," I said calmly. "The money from selling the house will be enough," my husband replied, trying to seem generous. My father's face flushed with anger, but I gently placed my hand on his, reassuring him. We knew my husband was in a weaker position, so there was no need to lose our cool. "Before we go any further, there's something important to discuss," I continued, handing over a document my father had prepared. It confirmed that the land under the house my husband had sold belonged to my father. "Yes, the house was yours, that's true, but the land belongs to my father, and he holds the title," I said, showing him the document. My husband's expression hardened. "So what? The house was still mine. You're just trying to get back at me," he sneered. "It's true that selling the house in your name wasn't illegal, even though the land is my father's," I explained, "but this causes a huge problem for the family that bought it. You sold them the house, but since my father owns the land, he could charge them rent. Can you imagine the chaos this would cause them? We don't plan to go that route, but we won't give up our land rights for nothing. Our intention is to give the family a chance to purchase the land. If they refuse, they might even sue you, since the deal wasn't as straightforward as they thought. Imagine buying your dream home, only to find out you owe more." After confirming my father's ownership, we approached the family who bought the house. Upon learning the situation, they were understanding and agreed that any legal disputes would be my husband's responsibility. They also mentioned they might sue him if things didn't work out. Seeing the color drain from my husband's face, I knew he realized the gravity of the situation. He understood that serious financial consequences were looming. In a shaky voice, he asked, "What should I do?" I smiled and said, "The simplest solution would be for the family to buy the land, which you will have to pay for. Once they own both the house and the land, all issues will be resolved. Since they weren't informed about the land's value during the purchase, they could even demand compensation from you, and because the land's worth might exceed the house, selling all your assets may not cover the costs. In the end, you could lose everything. Alternatively," I added, "you could buy back the house, pay for the land, and cover the family's relocation fees. You'd regain both the house and land, and potentially sell them again. However, after the relocation fees, you likely wouldn't have much left. Either way, you're looking at a loss," I continued, "and as for alimony, I'm seeking compensation for the emotional damage you've caused me. While evidence is limited and success isn't guaranteed, I'll pursue it regardless." My father chimed in, "Oliver, your career is also at stake. I still have many connections from my career, and they've shared your less than favorable reputation at work. You've alienated everyone." With a smug smile, my father shared this news. And finally, Oliver realized the depth of his troubles. The status he'd gained at work, through exploiting me and selling the house behind my back, was crumbling. Now, let's move on to what comes next, I said, smiling. It was a brighter smile than Oliver had seen in a long time. Today, the fate of your assets will be sealed. He could only laugh nervously, tears welling in his eyes. The negotiations went in my favor, and Oliver agreed to pay alimony. We settled on compensation for the land, which we explained to the family that had bought our house. In the end, everyone walked away satisfied, except for Oliver, who lost everything. Rumors began circulating at his company, started by my father's connections, and soon Oliver lost his reputation and was passed over for promotion. Isolated and humiliated, he eventually resigned. It felt like poetic justice. What Oliver had built through manipulation was now gone. As for me, I moved back in with my parents and started teaching sewing classes. Though my classes aren't packed, they provide me with a modest income, and the sense of purpose I get from sharing my passion brings me true happiness. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video, and stay tuned.